Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the grimy, unwashed world of Victorian England, where your morning routine would probably send you screaming back to your modern shower within the first 5 minutes. Picture this. You're stirring awake on a mattress stuffed with horsehair that's never been cleaned, in a bedroom where the windows haven't been opened in months because fresh air is considered dangerous to your health. The stench hits you first, a mixture of unwashed bodies, chamber pot contents, and that peculiar Victorian cocktail of coal smoke and decay that permeates everything. Your skin feels greasy and itchy from weeks without a proper wash, and there's a layer of soot on every surface that somehow accumulated overnight despite your best efforts. You'd probably think you'd landed in some post-apocalyptic nightmare, but this was just Tuesday morning for millions of people. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing our global community come together for these nighttime journeys. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You roll over in your horsehair mattress, feeling the coarse fibres poking through the thin cotton ticking that's turned grey with accumulated grime. The Victorians believed that horsehair made the best mattress filling because it was firm and supposedly lasted longer than other materials, though they conveniently ignored how it became a breeding ground for mites and other microscopic creatures that would make your skin crawl if you could see them. Your pillow, stuffed with goose feathers that haven't been cleaned or refreshed in years, has developed its own distinctive aroma that you've somehow grown accustomed to, though it would make a modern person gag. The room around you tells its own story of Victorian cleanliness standards. Heavy velvet curtains, drawn tightly shut because sunlight was thought to fade everything and fresh air was considered harmful to health, trap weeks of accumulated odours. The wallpaper, likely containing arsenic-based green dyes that slowly poison the air you breathe, shows dark stains where moisture has seeped through the walls. Your washstand holds a porcelain pitcher and bowl, the height of luxury, but the water inside has been sitting there for days and has developed a thin film on top that you'll have to break through when you attempt your morning ablutions. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with avoiding fresh air stemmed from medical theories about bad air causing disease, or if it was simply a practical response to the incredibly polluted outdoor environment of industrial cities. What's certain is that your bedroom window has been sealed shut with strips of cloth to prevent any of that dangerous outside air from entering. The result is a room that would fail every modern air quality test imaginable, where you're slowly marinating in your own exhalations and the off-gassing from furniture treated with toxic chemicals. As you contemplate getting out of bed, you realize that your nightgown, which you've been wearing for the past 2 weeks straight, has absorbed so many odors and bodily fluids that it could probably stand up on its own. The fabric feels stiff and slightly sticky against your skin, and there are mysterious stains that you've stopped trying to identify. This isn't because you're particularly slovenly. This is just how people lived when doing laundry meant a full day's work with harsh lye soap that was almost as likely to destroy your clothes as clean them. Your first conscious thought of the day isn't about coffee or checking your phone. It's about whether you can postpone getting up long enough to avoid dealing with the chamber pot that's been fermenting in the corner all night. The ceramic vessel, decorated with cheerful flowers that seem mockingly bright in this dim, malodorous environment, contains the accumulated waste of the past 12 hours. There's no flush toilet in your future, no quick trip to a tiled bathroom with running water and proper ventilation. Just you, that pot, and the knowledge that emptying it will be an adventure in itself. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, and there it is, your porcelain throne awaiting its morning audience. The chamber pot sits in the corner like some grotesque piece of decorative art, and you realize that your relationship with this ceramic vessel is about to become more intimate than any modern person should ever have to endure. The floral pattern around its rim, once cheerful, now seems to mock you as you contemplate the biological necessity that can't be postponed any longer. Victorian chamber pots were actually considered quite sophisticated technology for their time, crafted from fine china and often matching the bedroom's wash basin set. The wealthy could afford ones with tight-fitting lids that somewhat contained the aromatic experience, while the poor made do with basic pottery that offered no such luxury. You're somewhere in the middle class, so your pot has a lid, but after 12 hours of fermentation in a poorly ventilated room, that lid has done precious little to contain what can only be described as a biological weapon in ceramic form. The ritual of using a chamber pot requires a delicate balance of speed and accuracy that would challenge even the most coordinated modern person. You have to squat over this relatively small opening while wearing a nightgown that hasn't been washed in weeks, trying not to let the fabric dip into the contents below. There's no toilet paper as we know it. Instead, you're faced with a selection of old newspaper clippings, corn cobs if you're lucky, or leaves that have been stored in a basket beside the pot. The wealthy might have squares of soft fabric, but those get washed and reused, which brings its own special kind of horror to the whole experience. As you finish your business, you're faced with the next challenge: what to do with the evidence. In a city household, chamber pots typically get emptied into a larger container called a slop bucket, which gets carried downstairs and dumped into a cesspit in the back garden or into the street gutters. If you're really unlucky, you live in a tenement where dozens of families share a single outdoor privy, and chamber pot contents get tossed out the window with a cheerful cry of "Gardez-l'eau," a corruption of the French "Gardez-l'eau," or "watch out for the water." The emptying process itself is an art form that would make a modern person weep. You grasp the chamber pot by its handle, trying not to slosh the contents as you navigate narrow staircases and dodge other family members who are equally motivated to get their morning constitutional taken care of. The smell intensifies with movement, and you quickly learn to breathe through your mouth, though that brings its own problems when you can actually taste what you're smelling. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of chamber pots contributed more to disease transmission through poor disposal practices, or actually helped prevent it by keeping waste contained indoors, rather than having people venture to dangerous outdoor facilities in the dark. What's certain is that chamber pot maintenance was a full-time job for household servants, who had to empty, wash, and maintain dozens of these vessels daily in larger households. Your chamber pot adventure doesn't end with emptying, of course. The cleaning process involves a bucket of cold water. Hot water is a luxury reserved for special occasions, and a rag that's used for this purpose and this purpose alone. You swish the water around, trying to remove the stubborn residue that clings to the ceramic surface, all while trying not to splash any of this charming mixture onto your hands or clothing. The rag gets wrung out and hung up to dry, where it will develop its own distinctive aroma that somehow manages to permeate the entire room. The really fun part comes when you realize that your chamber pot isn't just a nighttime convenience, it's your primary bathroom facility for the entire day. Rain or shine, sick or healthy, this ceramic companion will be your most intimate household object. In winter, when the contents might actually freeze overnight, you get the added excitement of thawing out your personal waste before you can dispose of it. Summer brings its own special joys as the heat accelerates the fermentation process and creates aromatherapy experiences that would clear out a modern shopping mall. Privacy during chamber pot use was essentially non-existent in most Victorian households. Families of 8 or 10 people might share a single room, and the sounds and smells of everyone's bodily functions became as familiar as their voices. Children learned early that certain natural processes were simply part of daily life, and the concept of bathroom privacy that we take for granted today was a luxury available only to the very wealthy who could afford separate rooms for such activities. The psychological impact of constant chamber pot management can't be overstated. Your daily routine revolves around the filling, emptying, and cleaning of this vessel, and its contents become a regular topic of household conversation. The colour, consistency, and frequency of everyone's contributions are discussed with the same casual interest that modern families might reserve for weather or television shows. You become an unwilling expert in waste management, developing skills in efficiency and disposal that would impress modern sanitation engineers. If you could get past the smell long enough to explain your techniques, with your chamber pot ordeal temporarily behind you, your body starts sending another urgent signal: thirst. You shuffle over to that pitcher of water on your washstand, the same one that's been sitting there for days developing its mysterious film, and you realize you're about to make a decision that could literally kill you. This isn't dramatic exaggeration. This is Victorian reality, where a simple glass of water was essentially Russian roulette in liquid form. The water in your pitcher came from the local well, which happens to be located about 20 feet from where everyone in the neighbourhood dumps their chamber pot contents. Victorian city planning didn't really account for the revolutionary concept that human waste and drinking water shouldn't mingle. So wells and cesspits were often practically neighbours. The result is water that's teeming with cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and a cocktail of other bacterial delights that would make a modern microbiologist faint. You lift the pitcher and the water sloshes with a slightly thicker consistency than you'd expect from pure H2O. That's because it's not pure anything. It's more like a biological soup that happens to be mostly water. The film on top breaks apart as you pour, revealing water that has a distinctly brownish tint and tiny particles floating throughout. In the dim candlelight of your room, you might convince yourself these are just harmless sediments. But daylight would reveal them to be considerably more disturbing. The taste is where things get really interesting. Victorian water had flavours that simply don't exist in the modern world. Metallic notes from lead pipes, earthy undertones from nearby graveyards leaching into the water table, and that distinctive sewage finish that lets you know you're getting the full, authentic experience. people developed remarkably sophisticated palates for distinguishing between different types of contaminated water. Some had more of a sulfur character, others leaned heavily into the manure notes, and the really special wells offered complex bouquets that combined industrial runoff with human waste in ways that would make a sommelier weep. Historians still argue whether more Victorians died from drinking contaminated water or from the various alcoholic beverages they consumed to avoid drinking water. Beer, gin, and even laudanum-laced tonics were often safer choices than plain water, which explains why entire families, including small children, maintained a steady buzz throughout their waking hours. The phrase "drunk as a lord" takes on new meaning when you realise that sobriety might literally be fatal. Your morning drink comes with side effects that extend far beyond simple refreshment. Within hours, you might experience the Victorian version of Montezuma's revenge, except it lasts for weeks and has a disturbingly high mortality rate. Cholera could kill you within hours of your first symptoms, turning your body into a dehydrated husk so quickly that people sometimes died in the same position they'd been sitting when the symptoms started. Typhoid fever offered a more prolonged experience, with weeks of high fever, delirium, and a distinctive rose-coloured rash that appeared just before things got really serious. The water's bacterial content was so reliable that entire neighbourhoods would experience simultaneous outbreaks of the same diseases, creating a community bonding experience that nobody wanted to be part of. Families would go through cycles where everyone took turns being violently ill, and the only question was whether you'd recover before the next round of contamination arrived. The concept of herd immunity took on a very literal meaning when the entire herd was constantly sick. Victorian doctors had no idea why water seemed to make people sick, so they developed elaborate theories about miasma and bad air causing disease. This led to treatments that were often worse than the original waterborne illnesses, including bloodletting, mercury poisoning, and various purgatives that ensured you'd lose fluids even faster than the cholera was stealing them. The irony was that many of these treatments required taking more medicine mixed with the same contaminated water that caused the problem in the first place. Your daily water consumption becomes a calculated risk assessment that would challenge a modern statistician. Do you drink from the well that killed the Johnson family last week, or risk the river water that has a distinctly industrial flavour but hasn't killed anyone recently? The cistern in the basement smells like dead rats, but at least it's been sitting long enough that the really aggressive bacteria might have died off. Each choice comes with its own probability of survival, and you become an unwilling expert in waterborne disease patterns. The wealthy had slightly better options, including having water delivered in barrels from supposedly cleaner sources, but even these premium options came with no guarantees. Water delivery was an unregulated industry where quality control meant the delivery boy promising that nobody had died from this particular batch yet. Some wealthy families employed water tasters, servants whose job was to drink water first and see if they survived long enough to indicate it was safe for their employers. It was steady work, but the retirement plan was somewhat unreliable. Your stomach starts rumbling, which would normally be a simple cue to wander to the kitchen. But in Victorian times, breakfast is essentially another form of biological warfare disguised as a meal. You make your way downstairs to discover a spread that would make a modern food safety inspector immediately call in a hazmat team. The kitchen table holds an array of fresh foods that have been sitting out overnight because refrigeration is still a fantasy, and the concept of foodborne illness won't be properly understood for another few decades. The centerpiece of your morning meal is a piece of meat that's been preserved using methods that would horrify anyone familiar with modern food science. Salt-cured bacon hangs from hooks near the ceiling, developing a distinctive green sheen that's either mold or the beginning of some fascinating bacterial colony. The preservation process involves enough salt to pickle a horse, plus various chemicals including saltpeter, which is also used to make gunpowder, making your breakfast potentially explosive in more ways than one. Your bread comes with its own special Victorian charm, courtesy of bakers who've discovered that adding alum and chalk makes loaves appear whiter and more substantial. The alum is actually aluminum sulfate, which slowly accumulates in your system and contributes to a variety of neurological problems that Victorian doctors cheerfully attribute to hysteria or weak constitution. The chalk is literally ground up limestone, turning your morning toast into a calcium carbonate delivery system that gives everything a distinctly gritty texture. The butter situation is particularly fascinating from a modern perspective. What passes for butter has been sitting in the pantry for weeks, slowly going rancid in the warm air. It's developed a yellow colour that has nothing to do with natural dairy products and everything to do with creative chemistry involving annatto dye and other colorants that may or may not be toxic. The taste is indescribable. Imagine butter mixed with soap, aged in a gym sock, and you're getting close to the authentic Victorian breakfast experience. Historians still argue whether Victorian food preservation techniques were more dangerous than the alternative of letting food rot completely. But most agree that breakfast was essentially a daily game of chemical Russian roulette. The wealthy could afford slightly fresher ingredients, but even they were consuming foods that had been adulterated with everything from lead-based colorants to arsenic-laced preservatives. Your morning milk deserves special mention because it represents everything wrong with Victorian food safety in one convenient glass. The milk comes from cows that live in urban dairies, packed into basement stalls where they never see sunlight and survive on a diet of distillery waste and garbage. These cows are essentially four-legged disease factories, producing milk that's contaminated with tuberculosis, brucellosis, and various other bacterial infections that transfer directly to anyone brave enough to drink it. The milk delivery system adds its own special touches to this biological weapon. It's transported in open buckets through streets filled with horse manure and industrial pollution, then stored in containers that are washed occasionally with the same contaminated water you've been drinking. By the time it reaches your table, the milk has achieved a consistency and flavour profile that defies natural law. It's thick enough to coat your throat, sour enough to make your face pucker, and lumpy enough to chew. Victorian families developed remarkable tolerance for what modern people would immediately recognise as spoiled food. That slightly greenish tinge to your ham, that's just character. The bread that's hard enough to use as a building material, that's artisanal craftsmanship. The milk that's separated into distinct layers of varying colours, that's just settling perfectly normal. Your breakfast eggs present their own adventure in bacterial roulette. They've been sitting in the pantry for weeks because fresh eggs are a luxury, and they've developed that distinctive sulfur aroma that indicates the decomposition process is well underway. Cracking one open reveals a yolk that's more liquid than solid, and whites that have achieved a greenish transparency that suggests interesting chemical processes are occurring inside the shell. The cooking process doesn't improve things much, partly because your stove burns coal that fills the kitchen with smoke and soot, adding a distinctive flavour to everything prepared on it. The cast iron pans have developed a seasoning that's part grease, part rust, and part accumulated food residue from previous meals. Everything you cook absorbs these complex flavours, creating taste combinations that would puzzle modern chefs and probably violate several international food safety treaties. Tea or coffee with breakfast means more contaminated water, now heated to steaming temperatures that concentrate the bacterial content and create aromatic steam clouds that fill your kitchen with the essence of whatever died in the local water supply. The tea leaves themselves have been stored in damp conditions that encourage mold growth, while coffee beans have been roasted with various adulterants, including chicory, acorns, and sometimes sawdust to increase bulk and reduce costs. After choking down that breakfast of bacterial warfare, you decide it's time to tackle your oral hygiene routine, which in Victorian times was less about preventing cavities and more about surviving the cure. You approach your washstand where a primitive toothbrush awaits. If you can call a stick with animal bristles attached to toothbrush, these bristles come from wild boars, pigs, or horses, and they've been sitting in your damp bathroom environment for months, developing their own ecosystem of bacteria and mold that would fascinate a microbiologist. The toothbrush itself is a marvel of Victorian engineering, featuring bristles that are so stiff they could probably sand wood, attached to a bone or ivory handle that's cracked from repeated exposure to moisture. The bristles have never been properly cleaned because the concept of toothbrush hygiene won't emerge for several decades, so you're essentially scrubbing your teeth with a bacterial colony that's been growing unchecked since you first bought the thing. But the real adventure begins when you reach for your toothpaste, which is actually tooth powder, because paste won't be invented for another few years. Victorian tooth powder contains ingredients that would make a modern dentist immediately call poison control. The base is usually chalk or crushed brick, yes, actual brick, mixed with salt that's been sitting in damp conditions, and may contain various industrial contaminants from the salt-making process. The mercury content in your tooth powder deserves special attention because it represents Victorian chemistry at its most creative. Mercury was added because it supposedly whitened teeth and prevented decay, but what it actually did was slowly poison your nervous system while turning your gums black and making your teeth fall out. The irony was that people with mercury poisoning developed a distinctive tremor and slurred speech that became known as mad as a hatter syndrome, named after hat makers who used mercury in their trade. You dip your bacterial bristle brush into this powder mixture, creating a paste with your own saliva that combines animal hair bacteria, crushed brick, toxic mercury, and whatever's been growing in your mouth overnight. The scrubbing process is less like modern toothbrushing and more like attacking your teeth with sandpaper attached to a stick. The abrasive action removes not just food particles and plaque, but also significant amounts of tooth enamel, ensuring that your dental problems will only get worse with each cleaning. Historians still argue whether Victorian tooth powder actually caused more dental problems than it solved, but medical records from the period show a remarkable correlation between regular tooth cleaning and advanced dental decay. The wealthy, who could afford daily tooth powder use, often had worse teeth than the poor, who couldn't afford such luxurious self-destruction. The taste of Victorian tooth powder is an experience that defies modern description. Imagine licking a sidewalk while chewing on pennies, with a metallic finish that suggests heavy metal poisoning, which, given the mercury content, is exactly what's happening. The chalk creates a gritty texture that stays in your mouth for hours, while the salt burns any cuts or sores on your gums with the efficiency of rubbing alcohol. Your mouth starts bleeding almost immediately because the combination of stiff bristles and abrasive powder turns every brushing session into minor oral surgery. Victorian families became accustomed to spitting blood during their morning routine, accepting it as a normal part of dental care. The blood mixes with the chalk and mercury powder to create a pink paste that you spit into your wash basin, where it mingles with the other biological samples you've been collecting. The mercury absorption through your gums begins working its magic within minutes, entering your bloodstream and starting its slow journey toward your brain and nervous system. Symptoms of mercury poisoning include tremors, memory loss, irritability, and eventually complete neurological breakdown. Victorian doctors attributed these symptoms to everything except the obvious culprit, prescribing more mercury-based treatments to cure the mercury poisoning caused by the previous mercury-based treatments. Victorian dental care philosophy was based on the theory that stronger cleaning meant better health, so people scrubbed their teeth with increasing vigor using increasingly abrasive compounds. Some tooth powders contained ground glass or pumice stone for extra cleaning power, ensuring that each brushing session removed another layer of tooth enamel along with any bacteria or food particles. The aftermath of Victorian toothbrushing is a mouth that feels like it's been attacked with industrial cleaning equipment. Your gums are swollen and bleeding, your teeth feel loose in their sockets, and there's a metallic taste that will linger for hours. The mercury has begun its slow accumulation in your system, adding to the daily dose you get from your drinking water, your cosmetics, and various patent medicines that promise to cure everything while slowly poisoning you. With your mouth still bleeding from that delightful tooth powder experience, it's time to get dressed. Which in Victorian times was less about putting on clothes and more about wrapping yourself in layers of unwashed fabric that haven't seen soap in months. You face your wardrobe with the knowledge that everything hanging there is essentially a textile petri dish, cultivating bacteria and absorbing odours with the efficiency of a biological sponge. Your undergarments tell their own aromatic story of Victorian fashion priorities. The wool-flannel combinations, one-piece underwear that covers you from neck to ankles, haven't been washed since you bought them, because Victorian wisdom holds that washing clothes too frequently weakens the fabric and is generally unhealthy. These garments have absorbed weeks of sweat, dead skin cells, and various bodily secretions, creating a personalized ecosystem that's uniquely yours and absolutely horrifying by modern standards. The corset situation deserves special attention because it represents Victorian engineering at its most punishing. Your corset is made from whalebone, steel, and cotton that's been soaked in your perspiration for months without any cleaning. The laces have absorbed so much moisture and bacteria that they've developed their own distinctive aroma, while the metal components have started to rust from constant exposure to your body's humidity. Putting on this contraption means wrapping yourself in what's essentially a torture device that's been marinating in biological fluids. Victorian women's fashion required corsets to be laced so tightly that breathing became optional, which creates its own hygiene challenges. When you can't expand your ribcage properly, you can't take deep breaths, which means your lungs can't clear properly. This leads to a constant state of minor oxygen deprivation that makes you feel dizzy and weak, while simultaneously creating conditions in your respiratory system that encourage bacterial growth. The layers keep coming because Victorian modesty requires approximately 17 different pieces of clothing before you're considered properly dressed. Over your combinations goes a chemise, then drawers, then a corset cover, then stockings held up with garters, then petticoats, multiple petticoats, each one adding another layer of unwashed fabric to your personal bacterial ecosystem. Each garment has absorbed months of wear without cleaning, creating a textile lasagna of human secretions and environmental pollutants. Historians still argue whether Victorian women's clothing was designed to prevent physical activity, or if the physical restrictions were an unintended consequence of fashion. But the end result was the same. You're essentially immobilized by your own wardrobe. Walking requires careful planning because your multiple layers of skirts can weigh up to 20 pounds and make navigating doorways a strategic challenge. Your stockings are particularly fascinating from a hygiene perspective because they're made from wool or cotton that's never been washed and held up by garters that have absorbed months of moisture from your legs. The stockings have developed holes that you've mended repeatedly, creating lumpy patches that rub against your skin and collect additional bacteria in the uneven surfaces. Your feet, enclosed in these unwashed stockings, have created their own unique microclimate that would impress a tropical botanist. The outer dress layers present their own challenges because Victorian fashion favours dark colours specifically because they don't show dirt as easily. Your wool dress has absorbed coal smoke, cooking odours, street dust, and various biological contributions from other people you've encountered. The fabric has developed a patina of accumulated grime that gives it a distinctive texture and helps it maintain its shape even when you're not wearing it. Victorian Laundry Day was such an elaborate production that most families only attempted it once a month, if that often. The process required heating enormous quantities of water, making lye soap from scratch, and spending an entire day scrubbing clothes by hand with harsh chemicals that were almost as likely to destroy the fabric as clean it. Many families simply couldn't afford the time, fuel, or materials required for regular washing, so clothes accumulated months of wear between cleanings. The wool fabrics that dominated Victorian fashion presented their own special challenges because wool can't be washed in hot water without shrinking into unusable felt. This meant that woolen garments were often never washed at all, just aired out occasionally and brushed to remove surface dirt. your wool dress has absorbed everything it's been exposed to over the past year, creating a complex aromatic profile that tells the story of everywhere you've been and everyone you've met. Getting dressed becomes an exercise in layering biological hazards while simultaneously restricting your ability to move, breathe, or engage in any physical activity that might require flexibility. You're essentially building a textile prison around yourself, one that's contaminated with months of accumulated human secretions and environmental pollutants. The end result is a person who looks properly Victorian, but smells like a biological warfare experiment gone wrong, finely dressed in your multiple layers of unwashed Victorian fashion. You're ready to step outside and experience the urban paradise that is a 19th century city street. Opening your front door is like stepping into an alternate reality where the concept of municipal sanitation was just a gleam in some future city planner's eye. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight, it's the smell, a complex bouquet that combines horse manure, human waste, industrial pollution, and rotting organic matter into an aromatic experience that would clear out a modern shopping mall. The street surface beneath your feet isn't pavement as we know it, but rather a thick layer of mud that's been enriched with contributions from every horse, pig, cow, and human that's passed this way in recent memory. Victorian city streets were essentially open sewers disguised as transportation networks, where ankle-deep muck was considered normal and anything less than knee-deep was considered good road conditions. Your carefully arranged skirts immediately begin absorbing this biological soup, adding new layers to the bacterial ecosystem you're already wearing. Horse manure dominates the urban landscape because horses are the primary means of transportation, and each horse produces approximately 24 pounds of manure per day. With thousands of horses working in any major city, the daily manure production reaches industrial levels that would challenge modern waste management systems. The Victorian solution was simply to let it accumulate in the streets until rain washed it away, creating a natural composting system that doubled as a public health nightmare. The really exciting part comes when you realise that Victorian cities made no distinction between animal waste and human waste in their street management philosophy. Chamber pot contents, as you remember from your morning experience, often end up dumped directly into the gutters, where they mix with the horse manure to create a multimedia waste experience. Walking down the street means navigating through a biological minefield where every step could introduce your shoes to someone else's most intimate contributions to urban sanitation. Dead animals add their own special character to the Victorian streetscape. Horses that collapse from overwork or malnutrition are often left where they fall until they decompose enough to be easily removed, creating temporary roadblocks that also serve as outdoor laboratories for studying the decomposition process. Smaller animals, dogs, cats, rats, and various urban wildlife contribute to the overall ambience by dying in gutters and alleys where they slowly merge with the general street composition. Historians still argue whether Victorian street conditions were worse in summer when the heat accelerated decomposition, or in winter when everything froze into a solid mass that had to be chipped away in spring. What's certain is that pedestrians developed remarkably sophisticated strategies for navigating urban waste fields, including special walking techniques and footwear designed specifically for biological warfare conditions. the industrial contributions to street pollution deserve special mention, because Victorian factories operated under the philosophy that the cheapest disposal method was simply dumping everything into the nearest street or waterway. Chemical waste, textile dyes, metalworking residues, and various unidentifiable industrial byproducts flow directly from factory doors into the street system, where they mix with the organic waste to create chemical combinations that would fascinate modern environmental scientists. Your shoes, which were clean when you left the house, immediately begin accumulating layers of this street mixture that will follow you everywhere you go. Victorian footwear was designed with the assumption that shoes would be constantly contaminated, so they featured high tops and thick soles that could theoretically be cleaned, though the cleaning process itself was often more dangerous than the contamination. The street crossing experience requires tactical planning that would impress a military strategist. You have to time your movements to avoid the constant traffic of horse-drawn vehicles that are simultaneously depositing fresh manure and churning up the existing street mixture into an aromatic cloud. The horses themselves are often sick, malnourished, and suffering from various diseases that they're spreading through their waste products as they work. Victorian street vendors add their own contributions to the urban ecosystem by preparing and selling food in the same environment where waste management happens spontaneously. Fresh bread, meat pies, and other delicacies are prepared outdoors where they absorb the ambient pollution and collect direct contributions from passing horses and pedestrians. The concept of food safety simply doesn't exist in an environment where everything is contaminated by default. The noise level of Victorian streets creates its own health hazards because the constant clatter of iron-shod hooves on cobblestones, combined with the creaking of wooden cartwheels and the shouting of vendors, creates a din that modern noise ordinances would classify as hazardous to human hearing. You're not just walking through a waste field, you're doing it in an acoustic environment that would require protective equipment in any modern workplace. After navigating those delightful streets, you return home with the revolutionary idea that perhaps a bath might be in order, which immediately marks you as either dangerously radical or potentially insane by Victorian medical standards. The prevailing medical wisdom of the era holds that bathing is not only unnecessary, but actively harmful to your health, capable of weakening your constitution and opening your pores to disease-causing miasma that floats through the air like invisible death clouds. Victorian doctors, those paragons of medical expertise, have determined that the human body produces its own protective layer of oils and accumulated grime that serves as a natural barrier against illness. Washing this protective coating away, they argue, leaves you vulnerable to consumption, pneumonia, and various other ailments that are apparently lurking in clean water, waiting to attack freshly scrubbed skin. The medical establishment has convinced an entire generation that dirt is essentially biological armor. Your weekly bath, because daily bathing is considered evidence of mental instability, requires approximately 4 hours of preparation and enough fuel to heat a small building. The process begins with hauling buckets of that delightfully contaminated water you've been drinking, heating it over a coal fire that fills your house with smoke, and preparing a tin tub that's been sitting in the shed collecting rust, spiders, and whatever else finds tin tubs appealing as real estate. The bathing apparatus itself is a marvel of Victorian engineering that prioritizes modesty over functionality. Your hip bath is designed to accommodate a seated position with your knees drawn up to your chest, ensuring that actually cleaning your body requires the flexibility of a professional contortionist. The water level reaches approximately to your waist when you're crammed into this contraption, leaving significant portions of your anatomy high and dry throughout the entire bathing experience. Victorian bath water was typically shared among multiple family members because heating water was expensive and time-consuming. The traditional order was men first, then women in order of age, then children, with the water getting progressively more concentrated with each bather's contributions. By the time the youngest family members got their turn, the water had achieved a consistency that was more biological soup than cleaning solution. Historians still argue whether Victorian bathing practices were based on legitimate medical theories or simply economic necessity disguised as health advice. But the result was the same. People who considered themselves clean despite accumulating months of grime. The wealthy could afford slightly more frequent bathing, but even they rarely exceeded once-weekly ablutions. The soap situation presents its own challenges, because Victorian soap was made from lye that was strong enough to remove paint along with dirt. This industrial-strength cleaning agent was created by mixing wood ash with animal fat, resulting in a caustic substance that could burn your skin if you weren't careful. Using this soap was like washing with liquid sandpaper, effective for removing accumulated grime, but also capable of removing several layers of skin in the process. Your bathing experience begins with the shocking realization that water temperature control is essentially guesswork. The water is either scalding hot from recent heating or rapidly cooling toward room temperature, with no middle ground available. You enter this thermal lottery while trying to fold your adult body into a container designed for someone considerably smaller, creating a bathing position that would challenge a yoga instructor. The actual washing process reveals the true extent of your accumulated filth as months of grime begin dissolving into the bath water, creating a biological broth that becomes progressively less appealing as the cleaning continues. The water quickly changes colour from clear to brown to something that defies natural colour classification, while developing a texture that suggests significant amounts of dissolved organic matter. Victorian bathing etiquette required maintaining modesty even while alone. So you're supposed to wear a special bathing gown that covers your body while allowing limited access for washing. This garment immediately becomes soaked and clings to you like a wet canvas tent, making it nearly impossible to actually clean anything while preserving the moral standards that prevent you from seeing your own body. The drying process is equally challenging because Victorian towels were made from rough linen that had the absorbency of tree bark and the texture of burlap. These towels had been used by every family member and washed infrequently, so they brought their own distinctive aroma and bacterial population to the post-bath experience. Drying off was more like being attacked by a wet, rough blanket that smelled like a combination of mildew and previous bathers. The post-bath period brings its own special joys as your freshly assaulted skin begins reacting to the harsh soap and contaminated water. Victorian families expected to feel worse after bathing, attributing the burning sensation, rashes, and general discomfort to the cleansing process working properly. The idea that bathing should feel good was clearly evidence of moral weakness and insufficient character. Feeling poorly after your weekly bathing ordeal, you decide to seek medical attention, which in Victorian times means consulting with professionals who combine the diagnostic skills of fortune tellers with the treatment methods of medieval torturers. Your local doctor operates under medical theories that would make modern physicians weep, armed with treatments that are statistically more likely to kill you than whatever's actually wrong. The doctor's office itself sets the tone for what's to come. A room that hasn't been cleaned since the building was constructed, where previous patients' bloodstains have become part of the decorative scheme. The examination table is covered with a cloth that's been used for hundreds of previous patients without washing, creating a bacterial archive that represents every disease that's passed through this practice. The smell combines carbolic acid, rotting flesh, and that distinctive odour of impending medical malpractice. Your Victorian physician approaches diagnosis with the confidence of someone who learned medicine when bloodletting was considered cutting-edge technology. He never washes his hands between patients because the concept of germ theory won't be widely accepted for another few decades. So his hands carry bacterial samples from every patient he's seen today. His medical instruments haven't been sterilized because sterilization hasn't been invented yet, making each examination a cross-contamination festival. The diagnostic process begins with the doctor feeling your pulse and examining your tongue, which apparently reveals everything about your internal condition according to Victorian medical wisdom. He announces that you're suffering from an imbalance of humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, a medical theory that was already ancient when the Romans used it. The cure, naturally, involves rebalancing these humours through methods that would horrify modern medical ethicists. Mercury features prominently in your treatment plan because Victorian doctors believed it could cure virtually everything, from syphilis to headaches to general malaise. Your physician prescribes mercury pills that will slowly poison your nervous system while providing no therapeutic benefit whatsoever. The mercury accumulates in your brain and organs, causing tremors, memory loss, and eventual neurological breakdown. But Victorian doctors attribute these symptoms to the original illness rather than their treatment. Historians still argue whether Victorian medical treatments killed more people than the diseases they were supposed to cure. But mortality statistics from the period suggest that avoiding doctors entirely was often the healthier choice. The wealthy, who could afford regular medical attention, often had shorter lifespans than the poor, who couldn't afford such dedicated healthcare. Your doctor also recommends bloodletting because obviously your illness is caused by having too much blood. And the solution is to drain some out using techniques that haven't changed since medieval times. He produces a collection of leeches that have been used on previous patients and applies them to various parts of your body where they happily transfer diseases from their previous hosts while draining your blood. Alternatively, he might cut open your veins with unsterilized instruments, allowing your blood to flow into containers that haven't been cleaned since their last use. The pharmaceutical aspect of Victorian medicine reads like a catalogue of controlled substances mixed with industrial chemicals. Your prescribed tonic contains laudanum, liquid opium, along with alcohol, cocaine, and various other psychoactive substances that ensure you'll feel better temporarily while becoming thoroughly addicted. Victorian patent medicines were essentially recreational drug cocktails marketed as health remedies, creating entire populations of functional addicts who thought they were maintaining their health. Your doctor's surgical skills, should you require any cutting, are based on speed rather than precision, because anesthesia is either unavailable or consists of getting you drunk enough to pass out. Victorian surgeons prided themselves on how quickly they could amputate limbs or remove organs, with successful operations measured in seconds rather than hours. The lack of antiseptic technique meant that infection was virtually guaranteed, making surgery often fatal even when technically successful. The physician's understanding of women's health is particularly fascinating, because Victorian medical theory holds that women's brains and reproductive organs can't function simultaneously. If you're a woman seeking treatment, your doctor will likely attribute any symptoms to hysteria caused by your uterus wandering around your body causing trouble. The prescribed treatment might involve marriage, pregnancy, or having your ovaries removed to calm your obviously overactive female parts. Victorian dental work, should you require it, involves no anesthesia and tools that look like they were borrowed from medieval torture chambers. Tooth extraction is performed with pliers while you're held down by assistants, and the dentist's success rate is measured by how few teeth break off during removal. Dental infections are treated with more mercury, ensuring that your mouth problems become neurological problems within a few months. The follow-up care consists of more mercury, additional bloodletting, and various purgatives designed to empty your digestive system completely, because Victorian doctors believe that illness is caused by internal contamination. These treatments leave you weaker, sicker, and more susceptible to the very diseases they're supposed to prevent. But your physician attributes any deterioration to insufficient treatment rather than medical incompetence. Surviving your medical consultation, you head to work, where Victorian workplace safety standards make modern occupational hazards look like safety theatre. Your job, like most Victorian employment, involves spending 8 to 12 hours daily in an environment that would immediately be shut down by any modern safety inspector who hadn't already fled, screaming, from the premises. The concept of worker protection simply doesn't exist because employees are considered replaceable resources rather than human beings with rights to basic survival. Your textile factory workplace is a monument to industrial efficiency over human welfare, where cotton dust fills the air so thickly that you can barely see across the room. This dust isn't just annoying, it's slowly destroying your lungs, creating a condition that will eventually be called brown lung disease, but is currently just considered part of the job. Every breath you take deposits more cotton fibers in your respiratory system, gradually suffocating you from the inside while you work to earn enough money to continue suffocating yourself tomorrow. The machinery around you operates without any safety guards, covers, or protection systems because such precautions would slow down production and reduce profits. Belt-driven equipment creates a forest of moving parts that can catch clothing, hair, or limbs without warning, turning careless workers into industrial accidents with remarkable efficiency. The factory floor is littered with evidence of previous encounters between workers and machinery. Bloodstains, torn fabric, and the occasional finger or hand that someone forgot to clean up. Chemical exposure is simply part of your daily routine because Victorian industrial processes use substances that would require hazmat suits and specialised ventilation in modern times. Textile dyes contain lead, arsenic, and various other toxic compounds that you absorb through your skin and lungs throughout your working day. The bright colours that make Victorian fabrics so appealing are created using chemicals that slowly poison everyone involved in their production, from the workers who mix them to the customers who wear them. The noise level in your workplace exceeds anything that would be considered safe by modern standards, with steam engines, mechanical looms, and metal working equipment creating a constant din that gradually destroys your hearing. Victorian workers developed their own sign language for communicating over the industrial racket, but most simply accepted progressive deafness as an inevitable consequence of employment. The constant noise also masks the sounds of machinery problems, ensuring that equipment failures often become worker injuries without warning. Historians still argue whether Victorian working conditions were intentionally designed to maximise worker exploitation, or if they simply represented the best available technology applied without regard for human welfare. But the result was workplaces that consumed workers like raw materials. Life expectancy for industrial workers was significantly shorter than for agricultural workers, and workplace injuries were so common that most factories maintained relationships with local hospitals for volume discounts on emergency treatment. Your lunch break, if you get one, means eating food that's been sitting in the same contaminated environment where you work. Factory workers typically bring meals from home and eat them while surrounded by the same dust, chemicals, and pollutants they've been breathing all morning. The food absorbs these environmental contaminants, ensuring that even your nutrition contributes to your ongoing poisoning. Water for drinking comes from the same contaminated sources you've been dealing with at home, but now it's stored in containers that have absorbed additional industrial pollutants. The lighting in your workplace comes from gas jets that burn continuously, adding carbon monoxide and other combustion products to the already toxic atmosphere. These flames also create significant fire hazards in environments filled with flammable dust and vapours, making your workplace essentially a bomb waiting for the right spark. Victorian factory fires were legendary for their speed and intensity, often trapping workers who had no escape routes because safety exits were considered unnecessary expenses. Ventilation is non-existent because Victorian factory design prioritises keeping heated air inside during winter and preventing theft through open windows. The result is an atmosphere that concentrates all the industrial pollutants, human waste gases, and biological contaminants into a mixture that would challenge modern air quality measurement equipment. Workers develop distinctive coughs, skin conditions, and respiratory problems that are simply accepted as occupational characteristics rather than preventable health hazards. Your co-workers represent a cross-section of humanity that's being slowly destroyed by industrial employment. Children as young as 6 or 7 work alongside adults, operating dangerous machinery and handling toxic materials because child labour laws won't exist for several more decades. These children develop health problems and physical deformities from their work, but they're essential to family survival in an economy that doesn't provide living wages to adult workers. The bathroom facilities at your workplace make your home chamber pot seem luxurious by comparison, Factory privies are shared by hundreds of workers and cleaned never, creating biological hazards that exceed even Victorian standards for filth and contamination. The smell from these facilities permeates the entire workplace, adding another layer to the already complex aromatic environment you're working in. After surviving your toxic workplace, you're ready for lunch, which means another adventure in Victorian food safety that makes your morning breakfast look like a cautious appetizer. Midday dining in the Victorian era represents the creative peak of food adulteration, where every ingredient has been enhanced with chemicals that would make a modern toxicologist immediately call for evacuation. Your bread, that staff of life, has been improved with alum to make it whiter, chalk to make it heavier, and sometimes even sawdust to make it cheaper. The cheese situation deserves special attention because Victorian dairy science has discovered that bright orange cheese sells better than natural pale yellow cheese, leading to the widespread use of lead-based colorants that slowly accumulate in your nervous system. The lead gives the cheese a distinctive flavor that people have learned to associate with quality, not realizing they're developing a taste for heavy metal poisoning. Red Leicester cheese gets its appealing color from red lead, while other varieties use various toxic compounds that make them visually appealing and neurologically devastating. Your meat course presents its own catalogue of Victorian food innovation, starting with the preservation methods that involve saltpeter, borax, and various other chemicals that are also used in manufacturing explosives and cleaning products. The bright pink colour of your ham comes from nitrates that prevent spoilage while simultaneously increasing your risk of developing cancer. Though cancer won't be understood well enough to make this connection for several more decades. Victorian butchers have developed remarkable creativity in making old meat appear fresh through the judicious application of various chemicals and dyes. Meat that's been sitting in unrefrigerated conditions for weeks can be made to look appetizing through treatments that mask the smell of decay and restore colors that suggest freshness. The green tinge of decomposition disappears under coatings of sulfur compounds, while various acids neutralize the odors that would otherwise warn customers about the meat's actual condition. The bread you're eating contains ingredients that read like a chemistry experiment gone wrong. Bakers discovered that adding copper sulfate makes bread appear fresher and whiter, while iron sulfate gives it a pleasant yellow tint that suggests rich butter content. These metallic additives accumulate in your system over time, contributing to a variety of health problems that Victorian doctors cheerfully attribute to moral weakness or insufficient character rather than industrial food poisoning. Historians still argue whether Victorian food adulteration was driven primarily by profit motives or genuine attempts to improve food quality using the best available science. But the result was a food supply that was systematically contaminated with toxic substances. Government regulation of food safety didn't exist, so manufacturers were free to experiment with any chemicals they thought might improve their product's appearance, taste, or shelf life. Your afternoon beer, because water is still too dangerous to drink regularly, comes with its own collection of adulterants, designed to increase potency and reduce production costs. Victorian brewers discovered that adding strychnine makes weak beer taste stronger, while sulfuric acid can restore the sharpness of beer that's gone flat. Cocculus indicus a poisonous berry, was commonly added to create the bitter flavour that people expected from quality ale, slowly poisoning customers who thought they were just enjoying a traditional beverage. The sugar in your tea has been enhanced with various whitening agents because pure white sugar commands higher prices than natural brown sugar. Lead compounds, arsenic, and various other toxic substances are used to achieve the brilliant white colour that Victorian consumers associate with purity and quality. Your sweet tooth is literally developing a taste for poison, as you unconsciously learn to prefer the flavours that indicate the presence of toxic adulterants. Victorian confectionery represents the absolute pinnacle of creative poisoning, with candies that contain brilliant colours created from arsenic, lead, and mercury compounds. Children's sweets are particularly dangerous because bright colours are especially appealing to young customers, and the toxic compounds used to create these colours are more dangerous to developing nervous systems. Penny candies literally contain pennies' worth of heavy metals, making them both affordable and lethal. Your vegetables, when you can afford them, come with their own selection of enhancement chemicals, because Victorian farmers discovered that copper sulfate makes green vegetables appear fresher and more appealing. This treatment masks the natural yellowing that indicates age, while adding another source of metal poisoning to your diet. Root vegetables are often treated with various preservatives that extend their shelf life while slowly destroying your liver's ability to process toxins. The milk situation gets even more interesting at midday because it's been sitting unrefrigerated since morning, allowing any bacteria present to multiply exponentially in the warm afternoon air. Victorian milk vendors discovered that adding chalk or plaster of Paris can restore the white colour to milk that's beginning to turn, while various chemical additives can mask the sour taste that indicates spoilage. You're essentially drinking liquid bacteria culture that's been disguised to appear wholesome. Victorian dining etiquette requires you to consume these toxic delicacies with enthusiasm and gratitude, expressing appreciation for food that's been systematically poisoned through every step of its production and preparation process. Complaining about strange tastes or unusual colours would mark you as ungrateful and possibly mentally unstable, so you learn to enjoy flavours that would send modern food safety inspectors into cardiac arrest. The afternoon sun filters weakly through grimy windows as you prepare for the most socially treacherous part of your Victorian day, visiting friends. You adjust your unwashed layers and step into the parlour of your dear friend Margaret, immediately hit by a wall of human musk so thick you could practically chew it. This isn't just the scent of a few people who skipped their morning wash. This is the accumulated essence of bodies that consider soap a luxury and daily bathing a death sentence. You settle into a horsehair sofa that hasn't been cleaned since the Crimean War, surrounded by a dozen other guests who collectively smell like a medieval monastery after a particularly long Lent. The Victorian belief that bathing removes the body's natural protective oils has created a social atmosphere where everyone marinates in their own essence for weeks at a time. Margaret offers you tea with a smile that reveals teeth-stained brown from tobacco and neglect. Her breath a fascinating cocktail of rotting food, and the coal dust that perpetually hangs in London's air. The conversation flows as freely as the tobacco smoke that fills every corner of the room. Victorian social gatherings are essentially group fumigation sessions, where pipes, cigars, and snuff create a fog so dense you can barely make out the person sitting across from you. Your eyes begin to water, not from emotion, but from the toxic cloud that would make a modern fire marshal weep. The women delicately puff on their cigarettes, convinced that tobacco smoke actually purifies the air and protects against disease. Historians still argue whether Victorians genuinely believed smoking prevented illness, or simply used it as an excuse to continue their nicotine addiction while feeling virtuous about it. You notice that everyone's clothing carries the accumulated scent of previous social gatherings, creating layers of olfactory history that tell the story of every parlour, every dinner party, every church service they've attended in the past month. The wealthy Mrs. Pemberton's silk dress practically radiates the ghost of last week's mutton dinner, while young Timothy's wool suit holds the essence of his father's pipe tobacco mixed with the coal smoke from his daily commute through London's industrial districts. The afternoon entertainment involves parlour games that would challenge your modern immune system in ways you never imagined. Everyone handles the same cards, the same game pieces, passing around small objects that have been touched by hands that haven't seen soap since the previous Sunday's perfunctory splash. You watch in fascination as people share drinking glasses, fans, and even handkerchiefs, with the casual abandon of a society that hasn't yet connected the dots between personal hygiene and disease transmission. Margaret's youngest daughter demonstrates her piano skills, her unwashed fingers dancing across keys that haven't been cleaned since the instrument arrived from the factory. The music is lovely, but you can't help noticing how the child's hair hasn't been properly washed in weeks, creating an elaborate construction of grease, dust, and what appears to be remnants of yesterday's breakfast porridge. Victorian children are considered too delicate for regular washing, so they accumulate layers of grime, like tiny musical geological formations. The tea service arrives, and you realise that afternoon tea in Victorian times is less about refined elegance and more about surviving a gauntlet of contaminated refreshments. The milk hasn't been properly refrigerated. The sugar bowl has been visited by numerous unwashed hands, and the delicate sandwiches contain ingredients that would make a modern health inspector faint. You sip your tea carefully, noting how the cup carries the lingering taste of previous users, despite what passes for washing in the Victorian kitchen. As the afternoon progresses, you begin to understand why Victorian social visits were typically brief affairs. The combination of unwashed bodies, unventilated rooms, and toxic tobacco smoke creates an environment so challenging that even the hardiest Victorian constitution can only endure it for a few hours. You find yourself developing a headache that's part social politeness, part oxygen deprivation, and part sensory overload from the assault on every one of your senses. The conversation turns to health matters, and you listen in amazement as your friends discuss their various ailments with the casual acceptance of people who have no idea that most of their suffering is entirely preventable. They blame their constant coughs on bad air while sitting in a room filled with tobacco smoke, attribute their digestive troubles to nervous constitution while eating contaminated food, and wonder why they feel perpetually tired while living in conditions that would exhaust a modern person within hours. As evening approaches and the weak Victorian sun begins its early descent behind a curtain of coal smoke, you prepare to venture out for what passes as nighttime entertainment in this grimy paradise. The gas lamps flicker to life along the streets, casting their sickly yellow glow over a world that's about to become exponentially more dangerous to your health. You're heading to the theatre, that grand cathedral of Victorian culture, where tuberculosis and smallpox spread faster than applause, and where the air quality makes this afternoon's tobacco-filled parlour seem like a mountain meadow. The theatre district buzzes with excitement as hundreds of unwashed bodies converge on venues that prioritise spectacle over survival. You purchase your ticket and squeeze into a seat that's been occupied by countless previous patrons, none of whom bothered with what we'd consider basic hygiene. The velvet upholstery hasn't been cleaned since Queen Victoria's coronation, creating an archaeological record of every cough, sneeze, and bodily fluid that's graced these seats over the decades. The person next to you settles in with a wet, rattling cough that suggests consumption, while cheerfully sharing the armrest and breathing directly into your personal space. The theatre itself is a magnificent testament to Victorian engineering, and a horrifying biological weapon rolled into one ornate package. Gaslighting illuminates the stage while simultaneously depleting oxygen and adding toxic fumes to air that's already thick with human exhalation. The ventilation system, if you can call it that, consists of a few high windows that remain firmly shut against the dangerous night air. Historians still argue whether Victorian theatre architects genuinely believed fresh air was harmful, or simply prioritised aesthetics over the minor inconvenience of audience members occasionally dying mid-performance. You notice that the wealthy patrons in their private boxes aren't much better off than the masses in the pit. Their elaborate gowns and tailcoats may cost more, but they're just as unwashed, just as laden with the accumulated grime of weeks without proper bathing. Lady Worthington's diamond tiara sparkles brilliantly above hair that hasn't seen shampoo since shampoo was invented, while Lord Pemberton's evening wear carries the distinctive aroma of his favourite tobacco mixed with the horse he rode to arrive in style. The performance begins, and you're treated to the surreal experience of watching actors project their voices across a room filled with air so thick you could practically walk on it. The leading lady's powerful soprano carries beautifully, even as she occasionally pauses to suppress a cough that suggests she's sharing more than just her artistic talents with the audience. The male lead's romantic declarations are punctuated by the distinctive wheeze of someone whose lungs have been marinating in London's industrial atmosphere for decades. During intermission, the social rituals of Victorian theatre-going reveal themselves in all their contaminated glory. People mingle in the lobby, sharing fans, opera glasses, and programmes that have passed through dozens of unwashed hands. The champagne service involves glasses that receive what Victorian cleaning standards consider adequate washing, a quick rinse in water that's questionable at best. You watch in fascination as society's elite engage in animated conversations, while unconsciously spreading diseases that won't be properly understood for another generation. The second half of the performance introduces you to the unique Victorian experience of fainting audience members. Whether from the toxic air quality, the tight corseting, or the combination of disease and malnutrition that characterises daily life, people regularly collapse during entertainment. The ushers are well practiced at dragging unconscious patrons to slightly less toxic areas, though fresh air in Victorian London is a relative concept that would challenge modern definitions. You begin to understand why Victorian entertainment often included intermissions, and why performances rarely exceeded a few hours. The human body, even one adapted to 19th century living conditions, can only endure so much biological warfare disguised as culture. The woman in front of you fans herself desperately with a program, not from the heat of passion for the performance, but from the literal heat generated by hundreds of unwashed bodies in an unventilated space heated by gas flames. The evening's social obligations extend beyond simply surviving the performance. Victorian theatre-going includes elaborate rituals of seeing and being seen, which means extended exposure to the concentrated essence of London's social elite. You shake hands with people whose gloves haven't been cleaned since they were purchased, exchange pleasantries with individuals whose breath could knock a modern person unconscious, and navigate conversations while trying not to inhale too deeply. As the final curtain falls and the audience erupts in applause, you realise you've just participated in what amounts to a city-wide biological experiment. The theatre empties slowly, with hundreds of people carrying their various diseases back to their respective neighbourhoods, ensuring that tonight's entertainment will continue spreading its gifts long after the actors have taken their final bows. The theatre's curtain has fallen, but your Victorian day is far from over. As you return to your lodgings through streets that grow more treacherous by the hour, you face the peculiar ritual of preparing for bed in an era where nighttime routines could literally be the death of you. The gas lamps in your bedroom flicker with their characteristic yellow glow, casting dancing shadows across walls that haven't been properly cleaned since the Great Exhibition, while you contemplate the evening's beauty preparations that would horrify a modern dermatologist. You settle at your dressing table, a piece of furniture that doubles as both vanity and chemical weapons depot. The mirror reflects back a face that's accumulated a full day's worth of London's industrial atmosphere, coal dust and tobacco smoke, creating a complexion that resembles a geological survey of the city's pollution. Your evening skincare routine begins with what Victorians proudly call cosmetic enhancement, though modern science would classify it as systematic poisoning with a side of vanity. The face powder you apply contains enough lead to kill a small horse, mixed with arsenic for that coveted pale complexion that screams, "I'm wealthy enough to avoid manual labour and sunlight." Victorian beauty standards demand a deathly pallor that can only be achieved through careful application of toxic metals, because nothing says attractive quite like the early stages of heavy metal poisoning. You dust your cheeks with rouge that contains mercury, giving you that healthy glow that's actually the visible manifestation of your organs slowly shutting down. Your lips receive special attention with a lipstick formulation that includes enough lead to concern a modern paint manufacturer. The rich red colour comes from cinnabar, which is essentially mercury sulfide dressed up for a night on the town. Historians still argue whether Victorian women genuinely believed these cosmetics were safe or simply accepted potential death as the price of beauty, though the number of unexplained illnesses among fashionable ladies suggests the latter. The elaborate process of removing your daytime clothing reveals the true horror of Victorian fashion's relationship with hygiene. Your corset, which has been your constant companion for the past 14 hours, peels away from your skin like removing a second epidermis made of whalebone and regret. The garment hasn't been properly cleaned in weeks, creating a bacterial ecosystem so complex it could support its own research department. Your chemise, the supposedly clean undergarment closest to your skin, carries the accumulated moisture and oils of countless wearings between its infrequent encounters with soap and water. You slip into your nightgown, a garment that represents the Victorian approach to sleepwear. Maximum coverage with minimum washing. The heavy cotton fabric hasn't seen the inside of a wash tub since the previous month, if you're lucky. Victorian wisdom dictates that frequent washing weakens fabrics and removes their natural protective properties, so your nightclothes serve as both sleepwear and a textile museum of every night you've worn them. The bedtime hair ritual involves brushing out the elaborate construction that's been your coiffure for the day. Your hairbrush, with its natural bristles that have never been properly sanitized, works through hair that's been styled with pomades containing enough grease to lubricate a small factory. Victorian hair care involves products that would make a modern chemist weep. Bear grease for shine, macassar oil for manageability, and various powders that include everything from orris root to finely ground bones. Your teeth receive their evening attention through a dental routine that combines good intentions with catastrophic execution. The tooth powder you apply contains enough mercury to concern a Victorian physician, which is saying something considering their casual relationship with toxic substances. The toothbrush, crafted from animal hair and used by your entire household, spreads as many germs as it removes, turning oral hygiene into a family-wide bacterial exchange program. The bedroom itself presents its own unique challenges to peaceful slumber. The walls, papered with arsenic green wallpaper that literally glows with toxicity, create an environment where even breathing becomes an adventure in chemical exposure. The gas lamps that provide illumination consume oxygen while producing carbon monoxide, creating an atmosphere that's part bedroom, part gas chamber, part Victorian idea of modern convenience. Your bed, that supposed sanctuary of rest, reveals itself as another battlefield in your war against Victorian living conditions. The horsehair mattress has absorbed years of human moisture, creating an internal ecosystem that supports more life forms than a tropical rainforest. The woolen blankets, washed perhaps twice since their creation, carry the accumulated scent of every person who's ever slept beneath them, creating an olfactory time capsule of human habitation. As you finally settle into bed, still wearing the same undergarments you've had on for the past week, you realise that Victorian bedtime preparation isn't about getting clean for sleep. It's about surviving another night in conditions that challenge every assumption about basic human hygiene. You've finally managed to settle under the thick woolen blankets, but the comfort you seek is elusive. Your body shifts restlessly beneath the rough fabric, every part of you yearning for a simple night of peaceful sleep. But that's something you'll never find in this world. The bed, meant to offer rest, is more of a battleground, and you're the unwilling soldier. Fleas, lice, and other bedfellows crawl over your skin, the tiny creatures making their rounds with no intention of letting you forget their presence. You scratch at your legs, your arms, your neck, any part of your body that they've claimed as their territory. It's a never-ending cycle. You can't fully relax, can't fully sleep. The discomfort grows with each minute. You can feel the little bites, hear their quiet scurrying, and feel the tickle of movement across your skin. The itchy sensation is maddening. The more you try to ignore it, the worse it becomes. The fear of fire lingers in the back of your mind. Candles flicker softly on the bedside table, their light fragile and unreliable, casting more shadows than it dispels. The threat of a house fire is never far away. Those flames, though small, could turn your home into an inferno within moments. The gas lamps lining the streets could just as easily turn deadly. Each night, as you lie there, you're reminded of how fragile your world really is. Every breath of the night air carries the risk of danger, of burning alive in your sleep, all because of a forgotten candle, a tipped-over lantern. The thought is enough to make your heart race, a fear gnawing at you even in the dark. You shift uneasily in your bed, hoping that nothing will disturb the fragile safety you have, until you hear it. There it is, the faint sound of coughing from somewhere in the distance. It's a sound you know too well, one that sends a cold shiver down your spine, the constant reminder that sickness is never far away. The streets are full of those suffering from tuberculosis, smallpox, and the numerous other ailments that never seem to leave. You wonder, in those fleeting moments of clarity, if your cough is any different. If one day you too will join the endless chain of the sick. If this endless suffering will be your fate, just like the countless others before you. You can't even escape the noise. The hooves of horses clatter against the cobblestone streets outside, the sound echoing through the narrow alleys, rattling your nerves. A carriage crashes in the distance, followed by the shouting of voices, the clattering of wheels. Outside, the world never sleeps, and neither can you. You shift again, trying to find a comfortable position in the bed that feels like nothing more than a slab of wood covered by rough fabric. The mattress, stuffed with straw, offers no comfort, no softness. It's too hard to allow for anything resembling rest. You pull your knees to your chest, trying to get warm, but there's nothing to be done. The chill of the night creeps in. The air itself seems oppressive. You can smell it, dust, smoke, the stench of decaying bodies and stagnant water. It's always there, lurking, and you can never escape it. The entire city is soaked in this fetid aroma, thick with the weight of industrial revolution and human filth. You could almost taste it in the air. You shift, but the smell never leaves you. It sticks to your skin, settles in your lungs, and follows you even into your dreams. As you close your eyes, there's no escape from the world that has trapped you here. The flickering candlelight makes your eyelids twitch, as if you could see the flames even when they're not in front of you. You think of the strange, dimly lit rooms where people like you spend their evenings. There's a murmur of conversation, thick with the haze of tobacco smoke. You feel the weight of the room, a room full of bodies unwashed, all of you sharing the same stifling air, the same harsh existence. Even in the comfort of your bed, you're surrounded by a cloud of germs, bacteria, and the dust of a city that's never quite clean. You wonder how long it will be before you can finally sleep, before you can finally escape this nightmare. But there is no escape. Your mind races. Your thoughts scatter like the wind outside. It's all too much. too overwhelming. The bed isn't just a place to rest. It's a place to fight, to survive, to endure. You reach up and scratch at your neck once more. The sensation of tiny creatures burrowing deeper into your skin, driving you mad. It's like they're crawling under your skin, making their way into your bones. Every inch of your body feels violated. Finally, the reality settles in. Sleep won't come tonight. It's an elusive thing, slipping through your fingers, no matter how hard you try to grasp it. Your bed, your room, your life. They're all filled with invisible threats that keep you from truly resting. And so, you lie there in the darkness, the unsettling sounds of the city mingling with your own anxious thoughts. Your body aches from the endless scratching, from the lack of real sleep. The fear of fire, the constant dread of disease, the creeping feeling of hopelessness. It's all there. You close your eyes again, but the restless thoughts only multiply. Tomorrow will be another day of dirt, discomfort, and uncertainty. Sleep, it seems, is something only the lucky few experience in this world. The rest of us are left to toss and turn, haunted by a restless reality that never lets go.